Sick Leave, I Hardly Know Her by its_Kingston on AO3, read by its_Kingston. Summary. Aizawa Shouta has a cold, therefore he's home, drinking warm tea with honey in it, maybe taking a nice shower, and laying down beside his husband for a good day's rest. He deserves it at this point, really. His problem children don't seem to think so, though. No matter what they claim, they wouldn't have stolen that bus and crashed it into the woods if they thought Aizawa deserved his day off. Guess he's gotta go get them back now. Or, some of the students from Class 1A sort of accidentally hijack a bus and crash it into the woods. They'd never do it on purpose, though, promise. Aizawa Shouta cannot catch a break. He works day in and day out, from setting up mock fights and grading papers, to staying up late comforting Tokoyami after another nightmare, or clipping the stray coupon he saw for a product he knows he's heard Ochako mention. His days off are spent at home with his family, and though he normally has paperwork to finish up on the weekends, it's nice to do it while listening to Hisashi, Hitoshi, and Eri talk over breakfast. This weekend, though, goes a bit differently. When Aizawa wakes up, the first thing he notices is that he feels like complete, utter garbage. This is different from every other morning, mind you, because he normally only feels like garbage, not complete, utter garbage. His throat is bone dry and aches when he tries to swallow down his spit. With a grumble, he leans over Hisashi, who spends most nights tucked so close to Aizawa that he almost ends up beneath him, and reaches for his water bottle. Hisashi stirs when Aizawa sits up, blinking sleep out of his eyes. "Mornin', Sho," he whispers, ever conscious of his volume at such early hours. "Morning," Aizawa tries to say back, but his voice doesn't come out. Hisashi lifts his head and looks at Aizawa, brow furrowed. "Everything okay?" Aizawa nods, lifting a hand and pointing at his throat. "Sore?" Hisashi asks, sitting up. He reaches out and pulls the string on the lamp that rests beside their bedside table, lighting up the room. Aizawa takes another sip of water and winces as it goes down. "I'll make you some tea," Hisashi says with a soft smile. "I got the perfect cure for a sore throat. You'll love it." Aizawa smiles back fondly, nodding his head as Hisashi stands up. Before the man can leave, Aizawa takes his hand and plants a kiss on the back of it. That was this morning, and Aizawa feels better, maybe? He isn't really sure. The tea was delicious, as it always is when Hisashi makes it, and while the warm honey soothed the ache in his throat, his voice still wasn't there. His temperature had peaked at 101.3 degrees Fahrenheit over the course of the day, but even with a temperature so close to normal, Hisashi wouldn't let him anywhere near his paperwork. Even Eri had taken a look at him and ran back to her room to bring him her favorite stuffed animal so he'd feel better. As much as he hated to admit it, the day had been nice. Overlooking the fact that his voice was gone, and on occasion swallowing anything made him yearn for death, he'd had a relaxing day, all warm teas, soft foods, and nice naps. Hitoshi had left hours prior, a small smile on his face as he told Aizawa and Hisashi he was going to go hang out with some of his friends from 1A. Since then, Eri and Hisashi had spent most of the day in the living room where Aizawa had gotten situated. They both laid on the floor, Hisashi watching Eri draw something while she explained it all to him. On the television, reruns of an old hero show that Aizawa and Hisashi had watched in their youth played. It had been a wonderful day if it had stayed relaxing and nice, but it didn't take long for everything to go horribly wrong. Eri, as children of her age often did, got bored of drawing after a few hours and wanted to go take a trip to the park. Hisashi had looked skeptically at Aizawa when she asked, but he'd waved the pair off, gesturing for them to go out and have fun. It was just a cold anyways. He could handle it himself. It was just him alone, so there wasn't anyone he'd need to talk to anyway. And so, Aizawa was home alone, watching old TV shows as they aired, because he was too tired to find the remote and too invested in the show to completely fall asleep. It's probably good that he didn't fall asleep, because the news flashed on, cutting off the show. Aizawa furrowed his brow, sitting up as he watched the blurry footage play. A group of teenagers had boarded the bus, one of them demanding the bus driver to either chase after that car ahead of them, or shove off and die so I can drive. He blinked. No. It was a coincidence that this mean kid talked like one of his most troublesome students, right? The footage rolled on, and another one of the teenagers quickly apologized for the other's outburst and began explaining the situation far too quickly for the driver to understand. No. It was just because Aizawa spent so much time dealing with Midoriya that he was able to perfectly understand the words that spilled from his mouth. There were plenty of apologetic children in the world who talked a little too fast and mumbled a little too much. He kept watching, hoping for something that would contradict any of this information and really have it be a coincidence. Unfortunately, the next thing said was the nail in Aizawa's coffin. One of the teenagers in the back spoke up. "If you do not clear this bus, I'll have to make you. This bus is being taken over now. Please get off if you value your own safety." Aizawa's eyes widened. That was definitely Hitoshi's voice. Wait, Midoriya had driven Aizawa's own son to crime? Sounds about right, honestly. Or maybe it was Bakugo who'd done it. Aizawa stood up, dumping his blanket on the floor and searching for the remote. He found it under the couch, not missing much before he was able to turn the volume up. He listened to the report as he changed into something more fitting of a child recovery mission. Sweatpants, a hoodie, his capture scarf, a hair tie to ensure his frizzy, unbrushed hair didn't get into his face, and steel-toed combat boots because he couldn't find his sneakers and was not in the mood to turn the house upside down looking for them. The bus was seen crash to the edge of the forest just outside of the city, alongside another car. No bodies have been found yet, the reporter said. They continued with their report as Aizawa clicked the television off. He stared out the door, towards the forest. Wait. He backtracked and left a note on the kitchen table telling Hisashi he'd gone out to get more honey for his tea. Now, he was off to the forest. How many of his students were out here exactly? The area was a wreck with EMTs and fire trucks galore, yet not one of them had been found. Aizawa wondered what they were even thinking, hijacking a bus and driving it into another car. Really? He always thought they'd go down for unauthorized quirk use in the attempt to catch a villain. Aizawa approached a policeman tending the scene. The man's eyes were downcast, but he looked up as Aizawa stopped beside him. He didn't have his ID on him, nor was he wearing his hero costume, but Eraser had worked with cops more than heroes, so he hoped he'd be recognized by one of them. This is an active crime scene, the officer said, straightening up. You're with the news. We don't have any more information to share at this point, so we'll have to ask you to step away. Aizawa, unable to really say anything back due to his lost voice, simply nodded. After a pause where the officer didn't say anything, Aizawa pulled his scarf fully out from his face, hoping that would help. Alas, the officer didn't realize who he was, even with the scarf. He didn't have his golden eye protector, nor his sleeping bag, so other means of ID were off the table. Guess he'd be breaking into a crime scene to recover his now federally wanted by law problem children. It was scarily easy to slip past the people watching over the crime scene. If anything, Aizawa was more worried about dodging the cameras used by the various news stations. Being caught on television was something he'd like to avoid whenever possible. Aizawa ducked into the forest, right past the skeleton of the car. Had it exploded? Was it Bakugo's fault? Peering into the bus, Aizawa didn't see any of the familiar burn or explosion patterns from his student's quirk, so he temporarily ruled Bakugo out as the #1 troublemaker in this situation. Hey! Came a woman's voice from behind him. Aizawa slowly turned around. She wore a police uniform, and was definitely the caretaker of this area. She reached for the walkie-talkie in her waist, and Aizawa knew what he had to do. In an instant, he was running into the woods. What were the odds of his students having done the same thing when the bus crashed? Hopefully they'd all survived the crash and made their way to a safe location, though any location where Aizawa could find them was decidedly not safe at this present moment. When he was safe from the police force, he slowed down, stuffing his hands into his pockets as he walked. His eyes drifted around, searching for any kinds of clues to latch onto, something to point him in the right direction. Anything that would help him find and capture those soon-to-be expelled kids. Oh, those footprints in the dirt would do nicely. Aizawa crouched down, carefully examining the prints without disturbing the evidence. From the width of the print, the angle of the slant along the front, Aizawa figured they were Midoriya's shoe prints. He'd seen the boy wearing custom ones, the ones for people with extra toe joints. As avian as Tokiyami looked, Aizawa had seen him wearing standard shoes. He didn't have any quirkless students in his class. Other tracks were spread nearby in varying degrees of clarity. Despite Aizawa knowing what the prints of standard shoes for the extra jointed looked like, he could not identify any of the other shoe prints left in the dirt. So, on his list so far was Midoriya, Bakugo, and Hitoshi, but there'd been several other figures on the bus tape. Aizawa sighed, then grimaced when the puff of air aggravated his throat. He couldn't even sigh anymore. This wasn't fair in the slightest. The first signs of life Aizawa found was in the form of a trap. He'd been following the footprints when they led to a surprisingly leafy area. At a glance, he could tell the amount of leaves piled in this area was unnatural. The trees were spaced around the area, making a pile this large a statistical anomaly. So why were there this many leaves? A pitfall. That's why. Aizawa prided himself on this deduction, and stepped over the patch of leaves with ease. He forgot, however, that the boy who'd probably set this trap was the same boy Nezu had taken interest in. That was to say, Yuzuku could be a mad scientist at times. When Aizawa put his weight on the other side of the large pile, he quickly found himself sinking in. The even covering of leaves across the entire small clearing served to cover what Aizawa was quickly discovering, the muddy bank of a natural river. The massive leaf pile was a distraction. It probably wasn't even a pitfall. Aizawa tried to yank his foot free, but only found it to sink further. What was this, quicksand? He wasn't actually sure anymore. He looked around, finding his savior in a tree branch hanging close enough to wrap his capture scarf around. He held on to the other end, and with one good pull, he freed himself from the death pit. He perched himself in the tree to avoid any more mishaps, and began climbing his way deeper into the forest with the aid of his capture scarf. They had to have gone this way, he figured, looking at the snapped twigs and branches near the ground. Aizawa was, all things considered, proud of his students. He hadn't found any corpses yet, so they'd all survived the crash, and for some ungodly reason started laying traps. He was definitely going to be asking why he'd almost been lost in a quicksand trap, but they had their reasons. Hopefully their trap-laying reasons were better than their bus-stealing and crashing ones, though. He'd found his next lead in a small fire springing up from the forest. If he could speak at this point, he would have hissed Bakugo's name. Maybe Todoroki's, if he were here with them. Aizawa dropped from his tree, breaking out into a sprint through the woods. Aizawa kept his eye on the plumes of smoke dancing through the sky as he ran towards it, jumping bramble and dodging tree roots. He really hoped he was either in time to save his students from starvation, or save them from Bakugo. Those were the only two reasons he thought they'd be lighting a fire this time of year, especially with how warm it was. Oh no, did Midoriya suggest burning the forest down to find their way out? They had Bakugo with them, that was for sure. Todoroki was a speculation. Aizawa skidded to a halt and caught his breath. He closed his eyes and tried to rationalize his chaotic kids. If Midoriya was there, so was Bakugo. If Bakugo was there, Kirishima and Kaminari followed. If those two were there, Sero was likely with him. Midoriya and Bakugo meant either Ochako, Ida, or Todoroki would tag along, if only to stop the fights from getting too bad. No, Todoroki would get into more fights, and Ida would never let them steal a bus. It was probably Ochako. Hitoshi was there too, but he was likely there because of Midoriya. Out of the students listed, the ones who'd vote against burning the forest down would be Sero, Hitoshi, and Ochako. Maybe. Ida would definitely stop them now, but he'd also have stopped them before they even stole the bus. They were going to burn down the forest. Aizawa kicked his speed up a notch, running as fast as he could through the trees. He slammed his way through a final wall of bush, and ended up into a clearing with his students and their stupid fire plan. Those aren't his students. Aizawa would have been cussing up a storm had his voice box been working on this fine evening, because sitting there, around the blindingly blue fire, was the League of Villains. Those really aren't his students. Shigaraki blinked, staring him down. He moved to open his mouth, his hands tensing at his sides, but Aizawa held up a single finger. One moment. While Aizawa tried to figure out his next course of action, he noticed the bags around them, and the split logs they were sitting on. A bright pink tent was being pitched by the blonde in the back, Toga Himiko, as he did a variety of tasks. A masked man threw down 3 orbs beside the bag, and coolers popped out. Were they camping? His gaze fell to the fire pit as he tried to figure out what was going on. Wait, was that a fire pit? Aizawa squinted. They were all sitting around Dabi, who was laying on the ground. On fire? Staring into the sky, with a frying pan on his stomach. Huh. No one else seemed to question this, so Aizawa assumed it was normal behavior. In another show of completely normal behavior, Aizawa slowly turned around and walked away. So, that last lead was a bust, actually. Aizawa wasn't sure why the League of Villains were in this forest. Well, yes, he was. They were camping. But he knew he wasn't dealing with them alone while he was sick and looking for his students. Their presence was a whole can of worms that he was just going to toss into that quicksand pit, never to be opened. He continued walking, veering off the beaten path to walk the edge of the stream that had passed him. It was 4 in the afternoon, and the sun was on its way to retiring, and boy did Aizawa want to join it. He would have sighed if his throat hadn't been increasingly more aggravated over the course of the evening. He continued beside the stream until it started fracturing off into tiny trickles of water, eventually leaving him to walk alone. Damn, he should have brought something to drink with him. Oh well, he'd had plenty of water today, so dehydration wasn't a problem. For now. He sincerely hoped he wouldn't be in here long enough for it to become one. Aizawa came to the edge of a hill, uneven ground causing him to slow his pace as he went down it. He took a few steps, tired eyes trained on the ground ahead of him, when he noticed a stick poking through a gentle leaf cover. A stick straight up and down, ready to stab through his foot. Oh hell no. Aizawa backed up, eyes narrowed. He was not falling for their traps again. His capture scarf snaked forward, dusting the orange-red leaves out of the way. Sure enough, beneath the layer of fall leaves, was a stick graveyard. Every stick in the area was broken into bits big enough to cause some damage to the foot, then shoved into the ground, lying in wait. Aizawa leaned forward, looking down at them. Some of the sticks had been sharpened on the end, seemingly against rocks. A few from a knife. Aizawa fleetingly thought of the pocket knife Ochako had taken to carrying. With a deep exhale, not a sigh, because he'd learned his lesson, Aizawa began picking his way through the trap. It was actually very easy to get down the hill they'd made it on when he knew what he was looking for. It required little more than kicking the sticks down as he went, making sure to flatten them and not trip. Making sure to flatten them and not trip. If he went rolling down the hill, he was certain those sharpened sticks would give him a few new scars. When he made it to the bottom, he looked back at the hill he'd come down. The path he'd taken was obvious, leaves piled at the sides and sticks flattened where he'd walked. His eyes strayed to the sides of the pathway, then further, and there was a very clear way to either side of the trap. All it would have taken was a few steps in either direction, and he wouldn't even have seen it. Aizawa wasn't sure whether he was lucky to find proof his students had come this way, or unlucky that he'd be finding his students soon. There they were. After stumbling through the forest for roughly 2 hours, tracking them from shallow footprints and traps, Aizawa had found them. Or so he thought. Now that he was really looking at them, they looked hard and stiff. Despite their reputation, he believed all his students were soft and compassionate deep down. Sans Mineta, but there was a reason he was expelled from UA at the first week of school. But this was unsettling, to say the least. They were statues still, save for the jackets they wore fluttering in the breeze, their hair doing the same. Aizawa crept forward silently, ready to hit another trap. He stepped lightly through the bushes, eyes never leaving his students. The rustling was faint enough not to alert anyone in the clearing ahead. If they knew he was there, they didn't show it. On the edge of the woodline, Aizawa paused, squinting. Those were rocks. A lot of rocks. Wearing the jackets of his students. Wait, was that Yaoyorozu's jacket? And where did they get those rocks? Before Aizawa could finish his train of thought, there was a light rustle behind him, then a weight on his back, shoving him forward. Get them! Midoriya shouted from Aizawa's back. If Aizawa could only say how he felt when he saw his other students run from the bushes, homemade weapons clutched in their hands. Wait! Luckily that had been Yaoyorozu's jacket, and she was here. That's Aizawa-sensei! Midoriya's grip loosened drastically, causing him to slide off Aizawa's back. I'm so sorry I didn't know it was you, he blurted. Aizawa raised a hand, silently quieting the boy. Thinking the jester may come across wrong due to his silence, Aizawa reached to his side, intending to pat the boy on the head. Midoriya ducked away from him, dodging his hand with a nervous laugh. Aizawa's stare quickly pressured the green-haired boy into elaborating. We were waiting for the League of Villains to run through so we could ambush them, so we gathered tons of poison ivy and scattered it through the bushes. Midoriya laughed. The bushes you came through? Even if Aizawa could speak now, he'd have no words for his students at this time. Not only did they crash a bus, but they knew the League of Villains was in the forest, and they didn't contact Pro Heroes. Aizawa scanned over Midoriya for any signs of injury, but stopped when he noticed the boy was wearing socks on his hands. Aizawa's pointed staring must have gotten the point across, because Midoriya explained again. They're so unprotected from the poison ivy, he said. I'm the only one who's going to dive out and push the villains into the clearing. Ever the self-sacrificer, Aizawa thought absently. Are you, super mad? Kaminari asked, an awkward smile on his face as he walked over. Kirishima was nearby, yet Sarah wasn't to be seen. Aizawa supposed he was only mostly right about which of his students were here. His gaze fell on Yaoyorozu. He wasn't expecting her, of all people, to be here. He'd figure out why she let them steal the bus in a moment. He's sick, Hitoshi said, stepping forward. He hasn't had his voice all day. Aizawa nodded in confirmation, and half the group audibly exhaled. He only assumed Hitoshi, Yaoyorozu, and Katsuki didn't because they were never worried, or thought it was impolite to sigh a breath of relief here, in Yaoyorozu's case. Why are you out here when you're sick? Ochako asked. Aizawa was about to start strangling people with a scarf. Probably because we were on the news, Midoriya tittered. I promise we had a good reason for crashing the bus. Yeah, Kaminari chimed in. Everyone else began giving their 2 cents, nodding along with each other and pretending that stealing and crashing the bus was completely normal and called for. Except Katsuki. We saw the League while heading to the mall, Katsuki said gruffly. I'm not about to lose my chance of becoming a top hero because of some shitty group popping up when we don't have permission to use our quirks to kill them, so we made it work. Aizawa's eyes widened. He hadn't seen any signs of quirk use yet, and he supposed that if Katsuki was saying this, then the bus hadn't been charred because of him. We were just going to use the bus to cut them off, since they can't get around it, but they slammed into us, and everything rolled, including their car, Midoriya said. We're all okay, no injuries here. We aren't sure where the League went, but they ran into the woods after us. Ah, of course, perfectly normal. Aizawa was going to be perfectly normal, never speak at the League's campsite. So, how are we getting out of here? Kirishima asked. I think that's the most important thing right now. I kinda lost my way a while back, though. Was hoping someone would show up in a helicopter. When there was a chorus of agreement, even from Midoriya, who didn't quite remember the way out of the woods, Aizawa looked down at the ground and closed his eyes. God, he hoped he remembered the way back out. That was Sick Leave, I Hardly Know Her by It's _Kingston on AO3. Read by It's _Kingston.